Hello, ladies and gentlemen. That was a fantastic panel on resilience, and now we're going to move into our next kind of sector-focused plenary discussion on climate-smart land use. We've got a fabulous panel today, and I'm going to invite them up onto stage shortly, including Secretary Vilsack, and then a very, very diverse panel from a number of different actors from the private sector. But first, I want to set the scene a little bit on the whole issue and the agenda around climate-smart land use today in the kind of post-Paris world. I mean, really, the climate-smart land use space is really finally getting the attention it deserves. It got very strong recognition in the Paris Agreement. The 180 INDCs that were submitted had a strong mention of agriculture and forestry within them. And we've seen a myriad of different funds, commitments, and initiatives launched at the kind of country, donor, and the corporate supply chain level over the last few years. We've even seen increasing kind of public recognition because a number of Hollywood A-listers, including the Camerons, DiCaprio, Harrison Ford, and others, have been kind of mobilizing with eye-catching films and social media campaigns. They've been getting a lot of attention from folks. So the little sister of climate action, climate-smart land use, is finally getting the attention it deserves, and rightly so, because it's the source of about a quarter of land use, a quarter of all greenhouse gas emissions. A quarter now, but it's trending upwards. And in fact, what we need to do is go from a place of land use being a net source of greenhouse gas emissions to not even being neutral, but being a net sink of greenhouse gas emissions to enable us to reach the well below 2-degree target in the Paris Agreement. But the trend is upwards, as I said, and we all know why. I mean, with the increasing demand for food, fibre and fuel, we're going to have to increase production by 60% by 2050 to meet those demands. And then when you think about the fact that agriculture today already drives 75% of deforestation, if we carry on clearing land, greenhouse gases are only going to rocket further. So yes, we've got to focus on agriculture intensification, but that's really not easy. It's not easy to increase yields to that extent that we need it to. And also we have to think about the fact that the impacts of climate change, when we look at climate model projections, are in many places going to be reducing the ability of yields to increase, essentially. So going to have a negative impact on yields of key crops. But the opportunity of getting it right, let's stay optimistic because we need to. It's a fantastic area. The opportunity for getting it right is massive, not just in a climate sense. Let's not forget about the fact that the folks on the ground, the farmers, the governments who really have decisions to make on adopting climate-smart land use are not necessarily doing so because of climate change. They're doing so because of the other wins associated with climate-smart land use. Wins like increased productivity, increased farmer incomes, better accessibility, distribution, better nutritional value, and reduced food loss. And we have to remember the fact that it's a strange world that we live in now. We have a billion people going hungry. We waste a third of the food we produce already, and we have 1.4 billion adults overweight in the world. So there's a disbalance we need to address at that end as well. But change is coming, and that's what we're here to discuss. We've had, as I mentioned, a whole number of different activity and commitments going over the last few years, probably starting most actively around 2009. We've had the bond challenge at the government level on forest restoration. We've had all of the supply chain commitments from big consumer-facing and other agribusiness firms, which culminated in 2014 with the New York Declaration on Forests, when 50 companies have now signed up to pledge zero net deforestation in agricultural commodities. We've also got the finance community who are increasingly looking at investing capital in high sustainability forest and agriculture assets, from pension funds to institutional investors and even some commercial banks who are also looking at blacklisting investments that don't achieve that. It's perhaps one of the most politically intricate areas of climate action to navigate at the local level, climate-smart land use. But we've also seen some big disruptions, and I'm sure our panel will discuss those today. And I'll probably put it down to two key changes, one on supply chains and one on technology. It turns out that just 4 commodities, beef, paper and pulp, soy and palm oil, are responsible for half of the world's tropical deforestations. If we clean up those supply chains, we're a big way there. Hence the power of the New York Declaration of Forests if it gets to meet its targets. At the same time, We've had a big breakthrough in the technology space. The Global Forest Watch platform, the digital platform led by the World Resources Institute, is fabulous. We've got real-time satellite information at high resolution where you can start seeing who is doing what in any particular week in a particular area of land. Those who are burning forests illegally can't really hide anymore. But how can we use these new digital platforms to drive accountability and transparency around supply chains? So a combination of new technologies and new thinking is really starting to change the way we're thinking about the land use problem and the opportunity around that. So now I'm going to introduce my panel. I'm going to invite them up to the stage to kind of sit with me. And once they're down, we're going to have some opening remarks from Secretary Vilsack, who is Secretary of Agriculture for the United States. So my panel, so please welcome, ladies first, we've got Maria Fernanda Mejia, who's President of Kellogg Latin America. Next, we have Sunny Bagese, who is co-founder and CEO of global agribusiness company Olam. We then have David Brands, CEO of New Forests, the world's largest forest investment firm, and the true forester on our panel. And finally, we have US Secretary of Agriculture, His Excellency Tom Vilsack. Secretary Vilsack will start with some opening remarks here on the podium. Thanks very much.
Well, good morning. It's an honor and privilege to be here today to speak a little bit about what we are doing in the United States in agriculture and at the United States Department of Agriculture to assist in meeting the U.S. commitment to reducing greenhouse gas emissions and to make sure that agriculture is doing its part as well as forestry. You know, we are taking the issue of climate change incredibly seriously at USDA. We've established a series of climate hubs in all regions of the country, and we have a series of 7 of those hubs. We also have 3 sub-hubs, a hub in California that's looking at specialty crop production, a hub in Michigan that's looking at forestry issues, and a hub in Puerto Rico that's looking at Caribbean agriculture. Those 10 locations are providing an assessment of the vulnerabilities of American agriculture to climate change and providing assistance and help for producers around the United States to adapt and mitigate to a changing climate. Today, American agriculture is responsible for approximately 9% of the U.S. emissions. When we combine agriculture and forestry, we actually are a net sink here in the U.S., but we recognize the challenges of maintaining that, which is why the sub-hubs and hubs are so incredibly important. We've created a series of tools for our farmers to use and programs that they can use to expand opportunity, to adapt and mitigate to a changing climate. We've already had over 26,000 sessions on the website informing producers of steps they can take at this point in time. We also know that we have to do more to reduce emissions connected with agriculture, and that's probably the subject of this discussion today. Last year we announced 10 building blocks which will be designed to challenge U.S. producers to reduce their emissions related to agriculture by the equivalent of 120 million metric tons of greenhouse gas emissions. This is about twice the rate today. We believe we can achieve this goal by 2025, and we believe by doing so we will provide a 2% overall reduction to emissions in the U.S. economy, helping the U.S. to meet its goal of 26 to 28% reduction over 2005 baseline. We have a series of milestones and mileposts that will gauge and determine how successful we are with these 10 building blocks. They will be analyzed and reviewed annually. There is a focus initially on soil health, an opportunity for us to expand significantly the number of acres currently involved in no-till farming. Today it's roughly 67 million acres. We'd like to see it increase to 100 million acres. We want to see an expansion of cover crops in the U.S. We've already seen a 350% increase in cover crop activity just in the last several years. Better water management with appropriate irrigation systems and more efficient irrigation systems. Better nitrogen stewardship, looking at the right rate, the right time, the right application, and the right amount. A more appropriate livestock management, the utilization of rotational grazing on at least 20 million acres of grazing land within the U.S. focusing our conservation efforts under our Conservation Reserve Program on our most sensitive lands. We have a goal of 400,000 acres enrolled in our CRP program focused on the most highly sensitive and environmentally distressed lands. We will meet that goal with the announcement that we recently made from CRP just this week. A livestock partnership that's focused on the expansion of digesters. We currently have over 200 digesters that we've helped to finance within USDA. We have a dairy industry that is committed to reducing its greenhouse gases by 25% by the year 2020. They are working throughout the entire supply chain, and the digesters is one way, one strategy for them to significantly reduce the impact of dairy operations at the farm. We're going to look at management plans on private forests and make sure that we are doing a better job of stewarding our own U.S. forest lands, looking at ways in which we can use wood products more effectively, and of course making a commitment to renewable energy. American producers are committed to sustainability. They know that they have a responsibility both environmentally, socially, and economically to remain sustainable. So I look forward to the opportunity to discuss in greater detail the work of USDA in trying to help our producers in the U.S. Provide the tools, the opportunity to evaluate their production methods. We have developed a series of tools in the last several years that will allow producers to literally calculate the impact of conservation and farming practices in terms of greenhouse gases, ways in which they can more accurately utilize nutrient management to more effectively increase productivity without increasing emissions. So we are excited about the work that's being done. Last point I would make is that we're also committed to helping the rest of the world. We have committed to an open data commitment of our research, opening up the vaults of our research, allowing the world to see the information that we've accumulated through an open data initiative that makes the information more accessible and more available. We helped to launch the Climate Smart Agricultural Alliance at the UN a year or so ago. Now over 100 different organizations, countries, and NGOs involved in that effort to share best practices, to reduce emissions, and to create greater adaptability and mitigation in agriculture globally. And we are a founding member of the Global Research Alliance, now over 40 countries, committed to focusing research in a collaborative way on rice production, crop production, animal production, and nutrient management, utilizing same technology so that we accelerate the speed of innovation. As was indicated, we have a huge challenge ahead of us, 60% increase in productivity and a reduction of the food loss and waste that's occurring today. If we were able to reduce the food loss and waste, we would be able to feed virtually every food insecure person in the world today. So it's an exciting opportunity. American agriculture is committed, and USDA is committed to being a partner with American farmers, ranchers, and forest landowners. Thank you.
Just doing a quick microphone check. Okay, thanks very much. So we're going to now move into the panel discussion. And I thought I'd kick off the discussion with a bit of a focus. I mean, the whole summit we've had over the last day and a half or so has been focused on the world post-Paris and moving from pledges and making commitments and building coalitions to really acting and implementing and operationalizing and trying to get the pace of change that we need. So in that respect, I'd like to kind of ask each of you, and probably Maria Fernanda starting with you, let's give you a bit of a break, Secretary, starting with you in terms of what operationalizing and the kind of what does post-Paris mean for you and your organization as one of the kind of leading consumer goods facing organizations in the sustainability space? What next?
Thank you, Celine. Well, I think it has quite a bit of significance and implications. The Kellogg Company has a deeply rooted heritage in philanthropy and conservation from the onset, from our beginnings. We've enjoyed the trust over 100 years of consumers because of our deep commitment to philanthropy and conservation, not just to developing and producing excellent quality foods, grain-based foods that are very great tasting and nutritious. What we've seen over the last 20 years is that conservation has a higher priority for our consumers at the time of making a choice for the brands and the foods that they bring to their table. We're very lucky to be honored to be at the table of millions of consumers all over the world with our grain-based cereals, particularly at the breakfast table. And because of this elevated focus, we've developed what we believe are really embedded business and organization strategies that fully support sustainability and corporate responsibility. We're concerned with hunger. Naturally, we're a food company. We're concerned with food security and food scarcity. We're also concerned with inequality and the impacts of climate change and what that can have on our ecosystem. So for us at Kellogg, climate-smart agriculture is a really important platform where we spend an enormous amount of time and resources partnering with our strategic suppliers like Olam and with the Department of Agriculture here in the United States and many places around the world. Why is it important? Why is climate-smart agriculture important? Because we must work together in a collaborative manner, we've heard this all week, to increase productivity of our crop yields. We must help farmers, you discussed it earlier, be more resilient in the face of climate change by leveraging new tools and new techniques. And we must absolutely partner together to reduce greenhouse emissions and achieve our long-term goals, as we've said at Paris, right? Land use and change account for about 25% of global greenhouse emissions. And our farmers are the most vulnerable population to the impacts of climate change, big and small, flooding, drought. That has huge implications because we're going to have to increase food production by 70% by 2050 to be able to supply the world's food needs. So this is a very important topic for us in the private sector and in the public sector. I just wanted to call out an example of where we partner with the Secretary and his team at the Department of Agriculture. We do that by partnering through the Regional Conservation Partnership Program. Kellogg has had access to 3 grants that have helped us partner with our farmers in the great state of Michigan is a great example. We have a farmer, Rita Herford. She's a 3rd-generation farmer in Michigan. She runs her family farm of 4,000 acres plus. Through the work with USDA, we've been able to help Rita increase her soil health, increase her crop yields, and become a leader in the community, providing increased economical empowerment for the community that she lives in Michigan, and importantly, deliver affordable quality food. Rita, this past summer, was recently honored by the White House and President Barack Obama as a champion of change in climate-smart agriculture. And that, I think, is thanks to her individual leadership and contributions and the partnerships that private and public sector. And like that, we have many stories. So that's why Paris is so significant. And I'll just close by saying that I don't think there's anybody in this room that can't say that when they've achieved personal or professional success, however big or small, the time that it's been most satisfying is when it's been behind a collaborative agenda, behind collaborative goals that have been shared with others. And I think what Paris provides us is a shared platform and agenda to further collaborate, to have open and transparent dialogue, to share best practices. And why is this important? Because there are going to be bumps along the way. We're going to make some mistakes, but there is no turning back. And so I think that that's the significance for our company, for our strategic partners that we partner with, and for the collaborative efforts we have in the public sector.
Thanks, Maria Fernanda. Sunny, you sit, let's say, downstream, it depends which way you look at it, but downstream from Kellogg's. You've got a global agribusiness company with operating in over 70 countries. You're really at the front line of working with farmers and also with forestry investments, as I learned this morning as well. So you've got emerging sustainability and deforestation practices, and you're also working together with peers. What does next look like for you at Olam?
Thank you, Celine. And firstly, I think through the INDC commitments, climate accord, as well as the SDGs from the UN, the why and what we need to do is very clear. And that's a very important piece. But that's only 10-15% of the ballgame, as we from the private sector and businesses know. 85-90% of the ballgame is how are you going to execute. And this session is all about some examples of how we are executing on achieving this. And while we've all taken and bashed politicians, policymakers, and multilateral agencies for their ineptness and ineffectiveness and not taking the long-term view. These two accords are mini miracles or major miracles. And I think we should applaud the courage and the stewardship that the political establishment and the policymakers and the multilateral agencies together have made possible, much against most people's expectations. So, fantastic. It is now for the private sector and individuals to step up. The government and the policymakers have done their part. So for the implications of this for our sector, the agribusiness sector, as well as for our company, Olam, we are a leading global agribusiness. We operate from farm to factory gate. Today we manage and own about roughly 3 million hectares of land, where we cultivate more than 21 crops in 26 different countries across the northern and southern hemisphere. We are also involved in the supply chain, but we are also manufacturing and processing the various raw materials into food ingredients. We have 140 manufacturing facilities across the globe. We employ about 62,500 people worldwide. What are our challenges as a result of all of this? First, we need to make sure that we can contribute in achieving food security. We need to grow food production by 70%, and some estimates double food production by 2050 to feed a growing population, changing food and dietary habits, urbanization, which results in higher calorie consumption, transitioning economies, and higher per capita incomes, which means more consumption of food. So how do we achieve that? Let me give you an example from a commercial large-scale plantation example. I will also give you a smallholder farming example, because we deal with 4 million farmers. Apart from our own large-scale farming, we deal with 4 million farmers in various producing countries. So in Nigeria, there is a crop sesame, which is, as some of you might have seen, and those of you like Japanese food, sesame oil. That is a very hardy crop. It's a drought-resistant crop. It is a short duration crop. And it is grown as a cash crop in many parts of Africa, 7, 8 countries in Africa. In Nigeria, we have 1,800 farmers under an outgrower program. And over the last 5 years, through extension efforts in helping and training them to improve their yields, they have doubled their yields over the last 5 years. And that has dramatically transformed their livelihoods. In a large-scale scenario, in California, we grow almonds, pistachios, walnuts, but we also grow tomatoes, onions, and garlic for our dehydration facilities. We have developed a proprietary onion seed over the last 10 years period in California, which has allowed us to increase solid content from roughly 13% when we started off 10 years ago to now 26%. And that has resulted in us reducing our acreage under cultivation of onions by 7,500 hectares. It has saved us 65 million cubic meters of water. And we've also profited in terms of the cost savings of about $88 million that we have achieved over the last 10-year period. So how do you improve availability of food, adequacy of food? It's not really that 800 million people around the world are going hungry to bed every day, but about 1.6 billion people are overweight and obese. 2 billion people have nutrient and other deficiencies. Last year, in the packaged foods that we sold in Africa, 25 billion servings were fortified with either iron or vitamin or other minerals which were deficient in the parts of Africa where we are distributing those branded food products. The second issue is really water security. That's a big elephant in the room. We use about 4.5 trillion cubic meters of water. We will need about 7 trillion cubic meters of water by 2030. Where are we going to find this water unless we can maximize crop per drop of water? So how do we increase irrigation and water usage efficiencies and also have a cropping mix that maximizes the use of water? So that's the second big elephant. The third big issue, and for example, in our plantations, 100% is drip irrigated. The amount of water that has been saved as a result of better irrigation practices is significant. The third issue is really the impact of climate change. And Trucost came up with a study in October 2015 that said that just in 4 crops, corn, soybean, rice, and wheat, across 80% of the world's producing regions, FAO commissioned Trucost to do a study of what are the externalities that the production of these 4 food crops generate. And they came out with a number of $1.15 trillion. $1.15 trillion is the benefits from nature that is being taken in, for which the producers are not being issued the invoices. And in livestock production, beef, poultry, and pork, the number was $1.8 trillion. So roughly $2.96 trillion annually, just in 80% of the production of livestock and food crops, is the externalities that we create in terms of the benefits that we derive from Mother Nature to us for which we are not paying. And if we pay for it, the costs of producing that food will go up. So how do you resolve the central dilemma that if you want to grow these things sustainably, it might imply larger costs? How will we then protect the vulnerable sections of the society who already can't afford food? So how are we going to fix that problem? That's a central policy dilemma in my view. The fourth issue is really about is about inclusive growth. So in the rural areas where we operate, particularly in the developing countries, there is growing inequality. And that is not only a developing country problem, it's also a developed country problem. Between 1990 and 2010, in the developing world, inequality has actually increased 11%, whereas GDPs have tripled during that period. So that is the problem. So how do you resolve for all of these issues? And what are the specific actions that we will take as private sector, working alongside government, working alongside plural society in finding solutions to address these key developmental challenges?
Thanks, Sunny. And we're going to come back to that point on public-private. But I want to move just quickly over to David. You're CEO of the largest forest investment fund. You've got $2.5 billion assets under management US when we spoke yesterday. It's clearly a business model we need to scale in a post-Paris world to kind of get more capital into sustainable forestry. Tell us more about what you do.
Okay, well, thanks, Selena. It's a real pleasure to be here, and this is a really energizing event, and great to see the panel on land use, which is a key part of the climate change agenda. I guess I will talk to this from an investment perspective, and I think there's three main challenges coming out of Paris for us in the forest sector, but there are also huge opportunities. The first is the whole concept of a transition to a bio-based economy, which I think we're starting to see unfold, and that means things like bioenergy, biofuels, biochemicals, bioplastics, increasingly substituting for fossil fuels and petroleum and petrochemicals. We're seeing the opportunity for wood now to have much more extended use in construction systems. We're seeing cross-laminated timber, which is allowing us to build, say, 8, 10-story buildings out of wood, substituting for concrete and steel. We're even seeing now increasing use of cellulose-based fabrics that are substituting and creating sustainable fabrics. All of that, creates a huge new opportunity for the forestry sector in terms of biomass markets, but also leads to the second big opportunity and challenge, which is relating to increasing productivity. And like Sunny said, the need to double food production. Well, looking at some of the studies from organizations like WWF, they're suggesting that if you get out to 2050 to have a real penetration of bio-based materials, you're looking at probably quadrupling the production of woody biomass and fiber. That's something like a 4% per annum increase in productivity. If you look at the Iowa corn crop or some of the pine plantation technologies, we've had about a 1.5% per annum increase in productivity over long periods of time. So getting to 4% is going to need substantial investment and substantial technology. From our perspective, we need to almost entirely augment timber supply from new, intensively managed plantations as opposed to pushing deeper into the Siberian forest for our next unit of timber, and that's going to require substantial investment. And we estimate that somewhere between $100 and $500 billion is going to have to be deployed into expanding and developing the forestry sector to meet that challenge. And on top of that, we're going to need to knit together all of these technologies that are being developed in genetics and life sciences, big data, information systems, and even autonomous vehicles, robotics, and so on. All of that is going to have to be brought together to revolutionize how this sector operates. Plantations are going to have to be intensified on the land base that we already have, and any increase in plantations is going to have to be on marginal or degraded land. We're not going to move into any further conversion of forests. That has to be stopped in its tracks. And that really takes me to the third big challenge that comes out of Paris, and that is the enormous conservation challenge for our natural forests. And we have this huge carbon pool in the biosphere. The carbon that's in forests and forest soils and peatlands associated with forests is greater than the total carbon in the atmosphere. So we can't lose that carbon pool to the atmosphere. It has to be conserved. And at the moment, the problem is the lack of a price signal. And so for us, we have to integrate forests into a global carbon price signal. And ultimately, that will then allow investment to flow into the conservation of natural forests. We can see, potentially the creation of carbon pools that have communities and local businesses as shareholders supporting their work in forest restoration and conservation and protection. And that business model then, if it becomes investable, certainly starts to shift again how we see the forestry sector, where we're balancing production and conservation in what we call a landscape context. And I think that's really the future over the next 20 to 30 years.
Thanks, David. Just moving ahead, Secretary Vilsack, you've heard David talk about the importance of a carbon price signal for him. You've heard Maria Fernanda talk about the importance of the partnerships with organisations like yours. And Sunny, you said government's done a lot of the work in getting us the Paris Agreement. Now we need to get on. But at the local level, there's obviously also challenges on law enforcement and land tenure and the usual issues that prove to be very challenging. From your end of the table, what would you like to see more of from the private sector, from our other panellists and their peers, that you think would help scale up climate-smart agriculture?
Well, I think, first of all, it starts with a positive attitude. Part of the concern I have about this conversation has been that it sends potentially how you express the need for climate-smart agriculture can convey a sense that puts farmers in a defensive position, as opposed to someone who would be interested in collaborating. A lot of the language that's used is oftentimes, I think, critical of the farming population and of farmers, and I think we have to get by that.
Yeah.
Secondly, I think it is important to emphasize the opportunities economically. We are at USDA heavily engaged in trying to create those signals that you referred to. We have a great promotion of ecosystem markets. We think there is a tremendous opportunity for landowners to benefit, for society to benefit, by creating circumstances and situations where corporations and entities can essentially satisfy a social responsibility or, in fact, participate in some way in contributing to conservation. So we are spending a lot of time establishing ways in which we can quantify, verify, and measure the conservation benefits, because we think once you can measure something and quantify it and certify it, you can sell it, you can market it. And we are doing that right now. There are literally hundreds of millions of dollars now being invested in ecosystem markets throughout the United States. Secondly, I think we need to collaborate more effectively on research. I mentioned the Global Research Alliance, and one of the reasons I like that is because it allows us to coordinate our research across more than 40 countries so that we're not duplicating or replicating. And I think it's important for us to continue to look for ways in which we can collaborate on research and make sure that science is respected. Now, that's my other deep concern, that there are those who basically undermine the basis of science. There's no way we're going to deal with any of the issues that the panel has presented today without innovation. And we're not going to have innovation unless we have research and we have a belief in science. And unfortunately, in many, many parts of the world today, that belief in science is being undermined. So I think it's important for the private sector to help us convey strong messages about the importance of science and making sure that we have an acceptance of the science.
So we've only got a few minutes left, and I want to wrap up with one big hitting question, right? Which is we come to a lot of these plenary sessions around the world, and we tend to hear quite often in plenary sessions quite incremental talk, right? At the end of the day, we know we've got a big challenge ahead of us to get to well below 2 degrees in a short amount of time. We need peaking within, 5 or so years or 10 years. So we've got a big pace of scale needed. What are some of the breakthroughs or systems changes or just disruptive changes, let's say, in this space that you've seen or you think you may see looking forward that could really be game-changing for climate-smart land use that need to be backed?
I'm going to mention two very quickly. One is precision agriculture and the ability to be more precise with what we do with the land. And I think there's unlimited potential there. The drone technology, better understanding of each acre as an individual unit and how you approach each acre of land. Secondly, to work off of a comment earlier about cross-laminated timber, I think there is an extraordinary opportunity for us to get back in the business of using wood as a building material, not just for single-family homes, but for multi-story buildings. That's why USDA has sponsored the Tall Wood Building Contest. We have a 10-story building in New York City and a 12-story building in Portland that will be constructed in part with prize money that we've put together. I think we need to see more of that type of activity. Those would be two.
Thanks, Dr. Wilson.
I guess I would offer two thoughts. I think scale up and financing are two big areas for all of us to think about and focus on. We have a lot of programs going on all over the world, a lot of stories, and I think the work that we do through the World Business Council for Sustainable Development on a work stream around climate smart agriculture with Sunny is a great way to mirror some of the things that we do in fast-moving consumer goods. We pilot, and then we scale up, and we accelerate our efforts. We need to do more of that. And I think the Council gives us a great platform to scale up some of those activities. How do we need to invest more in research and science? I couldn't agree with you more. Well, I think from a business side, we just need to be really focused and relentlessly focused on being very efficient and effective on the things we do well so we can release resources and funding to put behind some of these big areas and finance more science and research. Finance with the public sector more programs around climate smart agriculture, not just in the United States, but particularly with our smallholder farmers all over the world, because it's also for their economic livelihood and that of the communities which they lead. So I would say scale up in financing.
Sunny?
So firstly, from the government side, I think about half of the countries that have submitted the INDCs don't have a formal land use policy, which is aligned with the landscape approach to a land use policy. That makes private sector very uncertain about how and where we can invest in the ag sector in those countries. So that's the first thing. Second, we need to mandate that everybody should do disclosures of their footprint. In the US, last year, 461 companies disclosed. There are 19 million companies in the US, so there's a long way to go. And US is more advanced than any other part of the world. Third is have a natural accounting protocol accepted and approved. The fourth is a carbon pricing. We can talk till the cows come home. 30 years down the road, we will still be sitting here and beating our breasts if you don't have carbon pricing. And that's something, because something that is free, we are going to indiscriminately use it. So if you're going to change behavior, we need carbon pricing.
Thanks. And David, to wrap up.
Well, we've just got a little bit of time left, and I'll just say to me, I'll echo something you said in your introduction, Celine, which is the revolution in institutional investment that's occurring, the decarbonization of huge pension funds and insurance companies' portfolios, and the repositioning of investment into things like climate smart land use. And our challenge really is, how do we channel that money into making the change to leading to an outcome that really is sustainable and contributing to the outcomes of this Paris Accord.
Thanks very much, David. Time flies when you're having fun. I can't believe that's already our session up. So I'd like to say a big thank you to all of our panelists, Mr. Secretary, Maria Fernanda, Sunny, and David. A big round of applause, please. I'd also like to say thank you to a couple of people, so the Global Environment Facility Group, WBCSD, and We Mean Business team, who've all helped with organising this session. Hopefully you've got the big takeaway. Climate smart land use has to be front and centre in achieving the Paris goals, and there's lots of exciting things going on in this area, lots of potential, and also lots of important benefit for economic development and addressing inequality more broadly. So thanks very much, everyone.